The long-awaited Diablo 4 has finally arrived. And if you paid for early access, then you have already experienced the game for quite a few days. However, I know there are going to be a large portion of you that are looking to play the game right when it releases and wondering if you should be spending your money on the game or if you should hold out a little while and see if there's more to come. And after playing the game for a couple of days and trying to play this as more of a casual player who just kind of wants to have fun with the game, experience what it has, and see if it's worth the massive price tag, I've got a few things to talk about. So when it comes to this review, I've got a few very good things to say, a lot of mediocre things to talk about, and a few pretty bad things to say. So without further ado, let's get into it and talk about the long-awaited sequel in the Diablo franchise. So we're going to start with the good, we're going to move to the mediocre, and then we're going to get to the bad at the very end. Now, starting out with the good, one big thing, and this is actually a pretty huge thing for the game, is that the base game state, like just the actual experience of playing the game, using your abilities, killing the enemies, running around and things like that, it is looking like a pretty solid foundation, particularly for more casual players. So what this means is that over time, as the game is updated, there is potential for this to be easily one of the better casual ARPG MMO type games that exist out there, which means that the devs have a good base to build off of, and there is hope that a long-term project in this game could actually function. Also, as is standard with Blizzard, the cinematics are absolutely breathtaking. They are the best in the business, I feel, when it comes to these cinematics. It is pretty insane the amount of quality that they get into these, although I will say the story of the cinematics is a little rough at times, but overall I easily have to give the cinematics like an 8 or a 9 out of 10. It is absolutely amazing. And another thing that Blizzard is of course known for is their music. The music in this game is absolutely insane. Now, I don't know how true this is, but someone told me that there is a system in the game where there are like multiple different instruments that are used for the same song, and they kind of mix those at random so that you always feel like you're getting a little bit different music every time. The one bad thing that I will say about the music, and this isn't even really a problem with the music, it's a problem with the way that it's implemented, is that the music balancing is really bad. A lot of the time it's super quiet, and then sometimes during like certain moments it is absurdly loud. They really need to bring those a little bit closer towards the middle. I'm fine with the music getting louder in interesting moments, but it doesn't need to be like breaking my eardrums loud, okay? And unfortunately, the last thing on the good list is it does seem like this is an ARPG that is taking multiplayer into account as like a base feature of the game. So if you have felt like in previous years that all of the other ARPGs that you've played, PoE, Grim Dawn, Last Epoch or whatever, haven't really scratched that itch of just hanging out with the boys and killing some monsters, this one definitely goes much further in the right direction in that regard. But this leads us to our first point in the mediocre. A lot of the reason for that is that I do feel that this game is much more MMO than it is ARPG. This feels like an MMO with an ARPG skin kind of just laid on top of it, if that makes sense. And the more and more that I play this game, it does really feel like a lot of the MMO features are kind of forced. Now, that being said, if you like MMOs, you probably won't hate this. I personally do like MMOs. I played WoW for many years, and I see a lot of the same kinds of systems and things that they've learned from developing WoW for so long. I see a lot of that in this game. However, it does feel slightly forced at times. But if you don't like MMOs, you're probably not going to like this game at all. So do keep that in mind. There is a good base here for an ARPG game, but as you start getting into the nitty-gritty, you're going to see a lot of those MMO features. They are everywhere. Next thing is going to be the graphics. The graphics are probably at a technical level about as good as you can get for this style of game. There's a very good balance between high fidelity graphics and them not like annihilating your machine and taking up every single resource that you have. The game runs relatively well. However, the reason this is in the mediocre section is because I genuinely really feel that for large portions of the game, the art direction is insanely poor. Most of the game that I played, most of the campaign that I played, it was just like the color palette that they chose from was just like, well, we need lots of grays, lots of browns, and lots of greens, and maybe nothing else. And it just kind of all morphed into this one big blob of color. So you kind of just like run around, and when most of the environments are filling this just exact same color space, and it just starts to really feel samey after a while. And it doesn't really feel like you're moving through different areas when one entire act is just all light brown and sand, one entire act is just all grays and greens, another entire act is just all grays and greens. It doesn't really feel too great. The only reason why I have this in mediocre is because there are a few instances throughout the campaign and throughout the game that do carry the art direction super hard. There are a few particular moments and a few particular areas that are very, very good looking, and they are like a complete fresh breath of air for just the grays and greens and blobs and browns that you have for the vast majority of the game. It's obvious that they can do it the right way, it's just they chose not to for most of it. Now, talking about the story, there are a few minor spoilers that I'm going to talk about here, so if you don't want any spoilers whatsoever, I've put some timestamps that you can jump to the next little section that won't have any spoilers whatsoever, and I'll just give you like a quick TLDW of the actual story itself, but I'm going to start talking about some minor spoilers right now. My major problem with the story in general is that it is an overall extremely simple and mediocre story that has no surprises really, and the only surprises that you do get are a few bits of shock value where they'll take like one of the main characters and just randomly kill them or maim them or injure them out of nowhere. I get what they're trying to go for here. They're trying to say like, oh, even if you're the most powerful person ever, you're not safe here, but they just do it in such a horrible, terrible way. One of my favorite characters of the entire story just dies randomly out of nowhere. It makes absolutely no sense, and it completely confuses me how they think that it's even somewhat of a good idea to do. But the vast majority of it isn't even like really bad or really good. Like there are some really good moments like towards the end when we start going into hell and things like that and the fights between the different people. And like I said, there's a bunch of really bad like shock value moments which really don't make a lot of sense. But the vast majority of the story is just filled with such mediocre nothingness and exposition that it's really hard to give it very many good marks here. I'm putting it in like the mediocre category because that's just what this is. The story is just very mediocre. Like the section of the story around like Act 2 to Act 3 where you're like traveling through the desert and chasing Elias is easily one of the worst sections of the entire game. It feels forced, it feels contrived, it feels slow. The section where you meet Mashif and you just go through the desert and you're literally just walking and doing nothing for close to 20 minutes is mind-blowingly stupid. There's no reason, besides just trying to fill time and annoy the player, to literally make you walk through the desert at slow pace while taking damage consistently over time, giving you like 10 enemies to fight, and then Mashif and Lorath just sitting there and just conversing for 5 minutes 3 or 4 times, and you just do nothing throughout the entirety of this besides just like listen to them. You can't skip it because it's not a cutscene. You can't make it go any faster. It's literally just there to like slow roll you and make you bored. The stuff that they talk about is worthless. There's nothing interesting or story based going there. Mashif is just like, oh yeah, I'm a drunk and you're a drunk and we're a drunk together. It's like they're talking about drinking alcohol and doing this. It's just completely worthless. I'm not exaggerating when I say this is like 20 minutes of your time that is going to be spent walking through a sandstorm talking about drinking alcohol. It's worthless. And then the portion that comes after that, my main issue with it is that there's this large section where you're chasing Elias where there's just almost no monsters to fight. It's like 30 or 40 minutes of like a group of monsters every 5 minutes or so that take you maybe 30 seconds to kill, and then you're just walking through environments and listening to the NPCs talk about stuff that doesn't matter. It's really genuinely extremely mediocre. This is unfortunately kind of common for these games. Like Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 both had like these really mediocre like sand/swamp sections towards the middle, and even from what we can see from PoE 2, it looks like Act 2 is a sand act. I don't know why these companies feel so forced to make mediocre sand acts as the second act. It's like, first act is, you know, you've kind of got like a standard grassy wilderness with some caves and some other stuff going on, and then Act 2 is this just horrible expanse of desert that just is completely worthless. And now, if you have skipped all of the spoilers, I'm going to give you the TL DW, which doesn't have any spoilers in it. The story is just very mediocre. There's a couple good moments towards the end of the story that do give halfway decent payoffs, but it mostly just feels like mid-tier fan fiction. You're never really surprised by the story besides a few moments of like shock value that really are kind of out of place and just detract from the experience and pull me out of it. The good and the bad don't really pull it out of that just like very mediocre point in the middle. It's a serviceable story. It does what it needs to do, but if you try to take it serious even for a moment, it really just kind of starts to fall apart and doesn't feel good. Now, that's me ranting about the story itself, but let's talk about the act of actually playing the campaign. The issue I have with the campaign is it just feels extremely stretched. In the previous story section, I talked about that portion of Act 2 and Act 3 that's just so horrifically stretched out, where it's just exposition and talking and not a lot of monster killing, and I feel like that portion could be fixed if they just put some more monsters in there. There was just nothing really to fight. I was just kind of walking around and doing nothing, and when they don't give you a mount until essentially like almost the end of the game, those sections where you just gotta walk through the desert, you know, and you don't have a horse and you don't have anything to make you go fast, you just walk around, there's no enemies to kill, and there's nothing to do. And it's very obvious that a lot of the campaign had a bunch of corners cut. Like there are sections where the NPCs will be talking and their mouth literally just does this. They'll be like stopping for periods of time or saying things, and this is slight spoilers, but it's not really like huge spoilers, so you don't have to worry about it. There is a section where a character is dying, and in his like dying breath moments, he's literally just going over and over again the entire time, and it just completely pulls you out of the of everything that has to do with that portion of the story. Like you're supposed to feel sad for this character, but you just kind of start laughing because, you know, he looks so ridiculous as, you know, he's dying. So I don't know, it just feels very weird. It's very obvious that a lot of corners were cut. They didn't do a good job on most of the animations of like the main characters as they're walking through the story. So this is stuff that can probably be fixed later, but the current campaign as it is, if you're just going to play this game for the campaign, I really can't recommend it on just the merits of what the campaign is. It really just feels, once again, like a large portion of just mediocre nothingness. Now, let's get back more towards gameplay. Let's talk about the dungeons. So the thing about the dungeons is that I do feel that the dungeons that we do have, we're talking about like the monsters, the things that you have to do, the bosses, all that kind of stuff, are all pretty good. The problem is there's only like 5 of them. Realistically, I've done quite a few dungeons now, and there are maybe 5 or 6 bosses total. There's maybe 5 or 6 layouts really, and maybe 3 or 4 different things that you do, and that's about it. Each boss and each layout has like a certain monster type. Like you're either going to be fighting like skeletons and ghouls and zombies and spirits, or you're going to be fighting like goatmen and bears and elementals, or maybe you'll fight some humanoids. Like, there's really only a couple different kinds of dungeons. The bosses are very, very limited. Like I said, there's maybe 5, and sometimes I'll do 3 or 4 dungeons in a row and fight the same boss every single time on every single one of those dungeons. And that being said, a lot of the boss fights in the game, I wouldn't even say that I really liked that much. The one boss fight in the entirety of the game that I do think that I like was at the very beginning of Act 4. It was one of the lesser evils, and that boss fight was pretty good, but even like the final boss fight and a lot of the other stuff just didn't really feel that interesting. It didn't really feel that like big and epic or anything, and I was kind of disappointed with a lot of the boss fights, if I'm going to be real with you. Talking about like what you're actually doing in the dungeons, typically there's like 2 objectives and they're just kind of random, and then you fight the boss. Typically the objectives are either kill all the enemies, grab 1 or 2 keys and bring them back to a certain area, or find specific enemies and kill them. That's essentially what you're doing in every single dungeon, and there's nothing else to really do. So you do 2 of those objectives, and then you kill a boss, and then you're done with the dungeon. And that's the vast majority of what the end game is right now, is just kind of running dungeons and doing little events and stuff. So it gets samey very, very quickly. Now, I hinted on this a little bit before, but the world only really has like 5 or 6 monster types. It's like spirits, skeletons, goatmen, various kinds of humanoids and like some animals and stuff sometimes. Like there's like bears and mosquitoes and quill boars and stuff like that. And then there's the demons that you've known all the way back since Diablo 1, right? Like you've got the small little tiny fallen demons, the big Balrog type demons, like the weird like snaky looking, you know, kind of demons, some flying demons, and that's about all that exists in the entirety of the game. The mob types are the same as they always have been in the Diablo universe. That being said, most of them are pretty decent, and they have like a variety of different like subtypes within them, so that is somewhat cool. However, this is nothing new. They've been using the same exact monsters for 20 years now at this point, so nothing really new or innovative here when it comes to monster types. I would say the last part of the mediocre category is going to be the class balancing. A lot of the classes seem to have a lot of different things that are pretty good. I can only really personally speak on the druid, but they did have to nerf a whole bunch of stuff on like day 2 or 3 of early access. So the game hasn't even released yet. It's still in early access, and they've already nerfed like all of the good builds. So if you didn't play on day 1 or day 2, you don't get to even see the really cool or powerful builds. Like the Whirlwind Barbarian got absolutely annihilated. They killed a whole bunch of different builds on a whole bunch of different classes. That's a little bit worrying, that in the middle of a race where you get like physical, like permanent, like your name on, you know, a statue at Blizzard, they're already doing nerfs in the middle of that race. That's a little concerning. I've only played the druid, as I said, and one big problem that I seem to see with the druid is that it's very dependent on legendary effects. Like if you don't have the proper legendaries, you can't really play the class. Well, you can, but you're limited to whatever you do find. So kind of some issues there. Really worried about class balancing at this point, because it kind of feels like they're already kind of struggling with it, and we're only 3 or 4 days in now, so here's hoping. But it is time to get to the bad. First and foremost, the worst part about this game is the massive price tag. It's got a $70 USD price tag plus free-to-play monetization. This is just essentially as greedy as it gets. They're trying to double dip in both base game price and monetization. Now, for the moment, the monetization is all cosmetic. I will give them that. It is purely cosmetic. However, I don't trust Blizzard at this point in time to leave it as purely cosmetic forever. I could very easily see after a few seasons that they might start slipping in little bits of pay to win inside the game, because I don't think that Blizzard thinks anything is holy anymore. They marketed this as there's not going to be any pay to win. We'll see about that. I don't believe you, Blizzard. So with that huge price tag, it's really hard for me to suggest that if you are not a dedicated like ARPG player and you're just looking for like a fun game to play for a little bit and maybe some more content in the future, it's really, really hard for me to suggest that you should buy this game right now, because $70 is a huge amount of money for what amounts to a mediocre campaign, a good base game state, but nothing to really do with it. So if you know that you're going to be playing Diablo for the foreseeable future, then yeah, go ahead and buy it. There's probably going to be stuff for you to do later. But if you're just looking for a simple experience right now, I can't recommend it. And one big reason for that is because it is absurdly time consuming for casual players, and it does not respect your time whatsoever. The thing about this game in particular is that it takes forever to level. I was doing the campaign and I was trying to do, you know, kill most monsters that I ran into, kind of do some side events here and there. I ran some dungeons and such, and there were a lot of times where I would get to the next step of the campaign and it would be like, okay, well, this zone is 45 plus and you are 38. Even though I've killed most of the monsters on my path, done most of the stuff that I could do. I didn't do side quests because they didn't actually give almost any experience and were not worth the time. But I tried to do dungeons, I tried to do events, I tried to do all that kind of stuff, like, you know, interact with the environment and such. And I just was 5 or 6 levels below the next portion of the zone, and that happened 2 or 3 times. So you really are kind of forced to interact with the MMO type stuff and go around and search and do all that stuff. But you got to be careful to not do too much of that stuff, because if you over level early, you're not going to be able to get past level 50 in world difficulty 1 or 2. So you can't over level, but you also can't under level. So you kind of just have to do like the little Goldilocks bit of leveling right in the middle and get everything about perfect. So it really doesn't feel like it respects your time, if I'm gonna be honest with you. I touched on this a little bit in the mediocre section, but I wanted to talk about this here. It does really feel like a lot of the environments are just empty. One thing that I was kind of hyped about when it came to Diablo 4 and their initial like reveal of it was the verticality of the environments and all the different places and things that you could go to, and I was pretty excited about that. However, it really just does feel like these are loading screens. That's all that they actually are. Blizzard has taken loading screens, and instead of giving you the normal loading screens, it's making you run like a QTE event of like pressing the button to jump across things or climb up things or do stuff. And you really notice these loading screens because your game will like hitch a couple of times as it's happening, so you know the game is loading. And that's all that it really ends up being. There's lots of just mindless wandering and running that you have to do. Yeah, you can teleport around places, but the little bits in between, there's not really a ton of monsters to kill. The monsters that are there aren't worth killing because there's only like 3 or 4 of them, and it's just a lot of emptiness. Now, one thing that isn't empty is the interface. This is mobile game out of 10. I think that this is essentially just a mobile game interface that has been applied to an MMO ARPG, and there are way too many menus, way too many things to track. There is just like an absolute overload of information, and yet absolutely no real depth inside of it. In a game like Path of Exile, there are tons of menus, tons of interfaces, and tons of things to interact with, but they all have meaningful and significant depth. In Diablo 4, there's like 15 menus, and I feel like we don't need half of them. There's just so many things and so much information just forced into your brain, and like these metrics that you have to follow and challenges and things to unlock and things of this and this. And it's just like there's no search functions in any of them. You can't really like see what you're looking for. You have to like search one by one to look at stuff. It just feels like mobile game out of 10. It is really what the interface feels like. Not great whatsoever. Pretty bad. Not super happy with the interface. And the last thing, and probably one of the most concerning things about it, is that the systems and like the items in the game are relatively confusing when it comes to like the way that ARPGs typically work. And the more that we figure out and the more that we investigate into this, the underbelly of the game, of like the end game and the systems and all of that, is just looking less and less and less polished as we go. A quick example that I'll give you is that Crip recently posted that he found out that a 40% resistance roll accounts to like 3% damage reduction, and it's just like the absolute worst possible thing that you could get on a piece of gear, when historically resistances are super important in all of these games. So all of those resistance rolls that are very, very common on gear are just completely worthless, and there's no point interacting with them at all. And another thing that he found out is that like burning damage isn't actually fire damage. So if you try to focus on like burning damage or get something to be burning and you want to like increase your fire damage or something, it's not actually fire damage. And the only way to find this out was to invest a ton of time and effort into getting to the point where he could check it. So there's just a lot of problems. These can be fixed, but as of right now, the systems, the items, and all of that are just super confusing and super weird. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, and it's just kind of frustrating, at least as it is right now. And that is going to be it for the video. If you want a TLDW too long, didn't watch, I'll do my best to do that in the next like 30 seconds. Essentially what this game comes down to is a very good base state for casual players of ARPGs that has a lot of, pretty fun potential. However, the campaign is very extremely mediocre. Some good points, some really bad points. The end game is kind of sparse and there's not a lot to do yet, but the future of the game could be pretty bright if it does get some more polish, it does get some more content, and some more things to do. You can play the game with your friends. That's pretty unique in the ARPG landscape right now, and it is a good experience to play with your friends. But at the end of the day, it's kind of an overall mediocre experience with a really good base game state and just not much to do with that base game state. So here's hoping that Blizzard can put the work in, get this game polished up and finished up, and get that campaign looking like a bright, shiny diamond instead of, that pile of sand or pile of dirt that I had to experience for 30 minutes in Act 2. And, just walking around doing nothing forever. Let's hope that Blizzard can do that. The game has so much going for it when it comes to the base game state that it's really unfortunate that there's just not a lot to do with it right now. So remember, boys, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest videos, and stay safe out there in Sanctuary. And I'll see you guys in the next video.